Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Officials from the Treasury Department and Small Business Administration testified on the effectiveness of Trump's virus relief programs. They say they'll be making some minor changes to the Paycheck Protection Program. The Trump administration is investing over $100 million into America's countryside. It will go towards essential services in small and low-income communities. A judge is facing backlash from New York's mayor, police commissioner, and district attorney. That's after he ruled to release a man without bail who's accused of violently attacking 3 police officers. One city in China becomes almost completely submerged overnight. Officials say it's thanks to heavy rain, but locals are questioning that. A human rights committee is requesting that the U.S. designate the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization. They say it's time for the world to call it out for what it is. And Texas removes over 3,000 cases from its confirmed virus case count. Local health experts say it makes the data more consistent and easier to compare. Treasury Secretary and the head of the Small Business Administration testified on the Trump administration's coronavirus relief programs before a House committee. The 2 officials were questioned about actions taken during the early stages of the pandemic and about their next steps in helping America's economy.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and SBA Administrator Jovita Carranza testified at the House of Representatives on their organization's effectiveness in assisting the nation's economy during the virus pandemic. The hearing was held by the House Small Business Committee. In his opening remarks, Secretary Mnuchin talked about how the coronavirus relief programs helped businesses during the pandemic.
We are in a strong position to recover because the Trump administration worked with Congress to pass legislation on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis and provide liquidity to workers and markets in record time.
The Treasury Department approved over 5 million loans totaling $517 billion to support the employment of over 50 million jobs. Of those loans, 27% went to low to moderate income communities. Retail sales rose by 7.5% in June, which was 1.1% higher than in June of last year. Mnuchin says this is a result of joint efforts by the relief programs and Congress. During the hearing, Mnuchin was asked to address criticism for reportedly accepting applications from industries and employers less directly hit by the pandemic. Mnuchin pointed out that the Treasury and Federal Reserve had strict rules and requirements passed by Congress in order to receive loans. Administrator Carranza asserted that the Small Business Administration followed through in solving unjust lending.
We are reviewing all loans. Moreover, we have provided the opportunity for business or lenders who believe that their reported information is inaccurate to contact us, and we will work with them to fix it.
Mnuchin was also questioned about the remaining $130 billion in the Paycheck Protection Program. The secretary said the money will serve as a second payment to businesses that are hardest hit. He also talked about setting up more safeguards in the relief program.
I think this time we need to have a revenue test and make sure that money is going to businesses that have significant revenue declines. That's something that Congress didn't have in the first provision.
Mnuchin intends to cooperate with oversight committees to make sure that proper rules and regulations were followed. He'll be working with Congress next week on a bipartisan basis to pass additional legislation.
The Senate is set to return from recess next week. Nancy Pelosi says she believes they can come to an agreement on a new stimulus relief package, and that Republicans will agree to a deal 3 times as much as they're considering now.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she's confident Democrats and Republicans can agree on a new stimulus relief package. The Senate is scheduled to return from its recess next week. Pelosi told Bloomberg News she believes Republicans will agree to a package that's closer to $3.5 trillion. Republican leaders are considering a lower $1 trillion figure. The House passed the HEROES Act in May. Republicans have criticized the bill, saying it would allow illegal immigrants and felons to be released from prison.
Colleagues say
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said it would not pass the Senate. Republicans said the $600 weekly unemployment payments should end. They say it incentivizes people not to go back to work. The payments are set to expire at the end of this month. Under the HEROES Act, the payments would end early next year. McConnell also said any new bill will need to include liability protection for businesses and doctors.
The Trump administration says it's investing $153 million in America's countryside. The money will go towards small and low-income areas. It's for essential services like nursing homes and hospitals.
The Trump administration is investing $153 million into America's countryside, focusing on small and low-income communities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture will distribute the funds. They're expected to benefit 2 million Americans across 23 states. The program will allocate funds based on population and median household income. Areas with fewer than 20,000 residents are eligible. Priority is given to locations with fewer than 5,500 people and communities that are below 80% of the state's median household income. The program gives affordable funding to essential services such as hospitals, nursing homes, child care centers, and community centers. A health center in Woodsfield, Ohio received nearly $1 million in funding. The center provides services to over 3,000 local residents. The money will come in the form of grants, low-interest loans, and commercial financing. So far, close to 100 projects have received funding under the current round of the program.
The Department of Defense is laying out a new policy about which flags are allowed to appear on U.S. military bases. Defense Secretary Mark Esper issued a memo to members of the military today. He wrote that the flags flown have to comply with the military's values of order and discipline, and said symbols of division must be rejected. The Confederate flag is not allowed on U.S. military bases under the new order. Esper said only certain flags are allowed. Those include the national flag, state flags, military service flags, prisoner of war, and missing in action flags. And a suspect accused of attacking NYPD officers, including the police chief, is released without bail. His hearing is set for October. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the department's response.
25-year-old Karan Campbell was set free without bail after being arrested and accused of assaulting an NYPD chief, a lieutenant, and an officer. This morning, Chief Terrence Monahan, one of the attacked, condemning the decision, saying Judge Robert Rosenthal's reckless decision to release Mr. Campbell without bail endangers every New Yorker and the officers who risk it all to protect them. Both the mayor and police commissioner say the decision to let him go doesn't make sense.
I am very unhappy about that, and it does not make sense to me.
I think the world at times seems like it's upside down. I mean, we got to do better than that.
Another suspect arrested that day, accused of assaulting officers, was held on $10,000 bail. We contacted Campbell's attorney for the reason behind his release, but she said they have no comments at this time. We also don't know his side of the story. But a few people told us they think the decision could give people the wrong idea.
Absolutely, because it make it seem like a slap on the wrist. Like, hey, you don't even need bail. Like, yeah, so it's like, I definitely see it as a bad idea.
The criminals, you take advantage of it, because now they think they can get away with anything, which is wrong.
The Manhattan District Attorney's Office told us they requested $75,000 bail for Campbell, citing the stitches, bone fractures, and bruises left on the officers. Campbell's next court date is in October. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg says her cancer has come back, but she won't be retiring. Ginsburg has already had 4 bouts of cancer, and she'll undergo chemotherapy to keep it at bay. The justice says as long as she can do her job at full steam, she will. She is the senior liberal justice in the court. If she retired, it would allow President Trump to nominate a conservative justice in her place. And coming up, cooped-up New Yorkers rediscover an iconic Manhattan park after it reopened with virus safety protocols. And thousands of positives have been crossed off the virus list in Texas. Local health officials say it'll help the state compare infection and testing rates accurately between its cities. That and more after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and bite-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
This week on China Uncensored, the FBI is calling China the greatest threat to America. A U.S. Navy carrier strike force patrols the South China Sea. Plus, Hong Kong's new national security law is way worse than anyone thought. Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NTD America.
As America begins to reopen, some cooped-up residents in New York are enjoying one of the city's most unique parks again.
A few dozen New Yorkers strolled through Manhattan's Highline Park on Thursday, marveling at the lush gardens, city views, and lack of crowds. The park reopened with limited capacity after a 4-month shutdown. The 1.5-mile strip, built on an old elevated railroad that runs along Manhattan's west side, was one of a few city parks to close in March. The park's board of directors said the space was too narrow to permit proper social distancing.
Our main priority is keeping people safe, and so that's why we've done a few things differently. We're having timed entry, one way, and encouraging everyone to wear masks, of course.
The Highline used to be an unfamiliar sight to New Yorkers, who know it as a tourist haven since it opened in 2009. Now it's an especially welcome sanctuary for those recently locked down. A few people sunbathed on wooden lounge chairs, wearing masks and sunglasses. Others snapped selfies, pushed strollers, or read books in the shade.
I feel good. Seeing the trees again, walk around again, feeling the breeze. It's feeling like normal again.
Visitors now must make reservations to enter the park, under the new rules in place to prevent crowding, and can only move north after entering from the south. Once a hotspot for the CCP virus in the U.S., New York's daily cases have remained fairly stable in the last week, with a positive test rate of about 2%.
The virus case count in Texas is now lower by thousands. Numbers were removed from the total from San Antonio, which included probable cases that came from antigen testing. A local health director says it allows the state to more accurately compare testing results between Texas cities.
Health officials in Texas subtracted over 3,500 COVID-19 cases from their running case count. They removed probable cases from San Antonio that were identified by antigen testing that tests blood samples. They're faster but less accurate. The gold standard for testing is PCR testing, which uses a swab inserted into the nose. Only 3 cities in Texas are testing and reporting data by CDC guidelines, and San Antonio is one of them. The director of Metro Health said Texas wants apples-to-apples comparisons between Texas cities. San Antonio's mayor said they will continue to count probable cases, but they will be separated from the confirmed cases. An investigation by the Epoch Times found that testing data is diluted by the different ways states count virus cases and deaths. The Metro Health Assistant Director said the antigen test using blood samples is still considered an accurate positive. He said experts prefer it when testing large populations, and that it's still a good test to use in San Antonio.
Up next, a Chinese city almost completely underwater in one night. Footage shows cars floating down streets. Now questions surround the official narrative. And we hear from a human rights attorney who is urging America to boldly identify the Chinese Communist Party's criminal nature. Find out what she has to say after the break.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
This season, take an incredible journey through 5,000 years of culture with Shen Yun. Discover why people are calling Shen Yun a visual feast, a pleasure to the ear, an epic tale, a must-see. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
China's far west province of Xinjiang is seeing an uptick in virus prevention measures, but authorities have reported few new cases. That disparity sparks questions about the need for the measures and the true number of cases. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Now we turn to Xinjiang. At least 80% of flights in and out of the capital of China's far western Xinjiang region have been canceled due to the pandemic. Subway transportation has also been shut down. A video posted online showed long waiting lines outside a hospital there on Thursday. All of them were waiting to be tested for the virus. Citizens also started stocking up on food and other essentials on Thursday evening. Some social media users in the city say they've been told not to leave their neighborhoods. The city has been put under a kind of half lockdown. Another video taken Friday shows almost no street traffic in the area. China's official figures report that as of Friday, the city only has 6 confirmed cases and 11 asymptomatic ones. The strict and overwhelming virus response has sparked questions on social media about whether officials are underreporting the true figures. Xinjiang is an autonomous region home to the Uyghur Muslim ethnic group. The area is now under intense state control. The UN estimates 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in re-education camps there. Beijing describes the camps as vocational skill training centers that work to combat so-called extremism. Overnight, almost an entire Chinese city has been submerged. Cars can even be seen floating down city roads. The scene was captured on Thursday night inside Hubei province. It's located about 300 miles east of Wuhan. Authorities claim the area was hit by heavy rains overnight, but some netizens suspect that a nearby dam secretly released water instead, causing even more severe flooding. Since the start of the flood, people from all over China have told us that they've noticed their local water levels rising dramatically during the nighttime. They also reported rumors that nearby dams had been releasing the water in secret. One user said that authorities won't reveal the truth about the dam because if they did, they'd have to compensate the locals. But if the reason behind the flooding is merely heavy rain, there's no need to pay them. China's Yangtze River basin has been drenched by severe flooding for around 50 days now. Half of the country's important agricultural provinces have been impacted. Areas of farmland are turning into lakes and crops are soaked. Farmers expect a hugely reduced harvest this year or even no harvest at all. But China's Agricultural Department announced on Friday that the country's supply of grain and other agricultural products is sufficient and that market operation is stable. They also said the country has enough rice and wheat stocks and that grains, vegetables, and meat supplies are all guaranteed for this year. The statement doesn't mention the widespread flooding whatsoever. Deutsche Bank's Asia office will relocate from Hong Kong to Singapore. The bank's new Asia head decided for Singapore when he takes over the job next month. Deutsche Bank is the biggest German bank with branches in almost 60 countries. Due to the new national security law that Beijing imposed on Hong Kong, freedoms in Hong Kong are restricted, and tensions between the U.S. and China are rising.
In response to reports of a potential U.S. travel ban on Communist Party members, Beijing said on Friday that any such travel ban would mean Washington stands against the entire Chinese population. But the Chinese people took to social media to say they disagree.
China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson called Washington's potential travel ban against China's ruling Communist Party absurd and said it's against the will of the Chinese and American people. News about the ban provoked heated discussion on China's social media, but most seem to disagree with their spokesperson. A state media account posted the news on the Chinese counterpart of Twitter, Weibo. However, the comments below mostly support the idea of the ban. The most liked comment reads, "This is powerful," indicating the travel ban, and asked Washington, "Please do what you said and don't back down." Other comments include, "This is the best thing the United States has ever done," and "Wow, I guess no ordinary Chinese people would oppose this policy." Some even tagged the account of the U.S. Embassy in China and said, "Please do enforce this." Multiple media reported that the Trump administration is considering banning entry of all Communist Party members, Chinese military personnel, and executives of state-owned companies. NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu said one of the reasons the Chinese people are supporting the ban is they know that the corrupt officials in China will suffer most from it.
Yes, it's quite ironic, but there has been a pattern of Chinese officials transferring their assets overseas with the political instability inside China. Also, the economic downturn over the past decade, many officials have moved their children and their families overseas, and usually the hope is that the official will then join the family later and their assets will be safer.
That's why some said by issuing the ban, the U.S. would be helping China with its anti-corruption campaign. One comment called President Trump the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Another called him an anti-corruption hero and said we need to rely on the United States for our anti-corruption movement.
I think a large part of the Chinese people are pretty disillusioned with the party ruling. They know that a lot of officials are corrupt, and that's why they've decided to move their assets overseas. So for the ordinary Chinese people who don't have the financial means to move abroad, I think this kind of announcement is kind of funny to them, that the high-level officials end up perhaps being in a bit of trouble there.
U.S. immigration law forbid members of the Communist Party or other totalitarian or terrorist organizations to become U.S. citizens. During the Cold War, communists can't even enter the country, but the U.S. loosened the restriction in the 1990s. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
And a group in Liechtenstein is pushing for a law that would crack down on human rights violators. The law would deny entry into the country for foreign officials who are involved in human rights abuses.
A group of people gathered to rally in Liechtenstein, a small European country between Austria and Switzerland. The event was held to call for lawmakers' support on a human rights law dubbed the Magnitsky Act. If passed, the law would prevent people who have committed serious human rights violations, like persecuting people of faith, from entering the country. It would also allow their assets to be frozen. The United States passed and signed the Magnitsky Act into law in 2012 after Russian officials allegedly tortured a tax consultant to death in prison. Now the rally's organizers say it's important for Liechtenstein to follow America's lead.
We want Liechtenstein to follow the good example of the USA and implement the Magnitsky Act. That's why I will submit an appeal to the head of government of Liechtenstein.
The gathering was organized and supported by Falun Gong practitioners. Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, is a spiritual meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Though it was introduced to the public in China back in 1992, the Chinese regime now brutally persecutes those who practice it, as well as those of other spiritual or religious backgrounds. The rally's organizers are now appealing to lawmakers in hopes they'll implement the act, which would penalize the very officials who enable the persecution of Falun Gong in China. Liechtenstein is known for using its low corporate tax rates to draw in companies from all over the world. That's how the small country became one of the wealthiest worldwide, relative to its purchasing power. The rally's organizer added that it was especially important to implement the law because of the country's strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
Especially in Liechtenstein, it is important that the law is implemented because of the large sums of money flowing into Liechtenstein from CCP officials.
The country's heads of state have received the appeal to implement the law. Liechtenstein's parliament is currently on summer break. Talks will continue when officials return in the fall. NTD, Liechtenstein.
A transnational criminal organization. That's what a Human Rights Committee is urging the U.S. Department of Justice to designate the Chinese Communist Party. The committee says it's time to get bold in calling out the CCP's criminal activity. NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to the human rights attorney who drafted the letter to find out what they hope to accomplish.
The United States continues cracking down hard on the Chinese Communist Party. U.S. officials like the Attorney General William Barr, the FBI Director, and the National Security Advisor are laying bare what Barr calls predatory and unlawful tactics of the CCP. The Committee on the Present Danger, China, sent an open letter to the Attorney General requesting that the United States designate the CCP as a transnational criminal organization.
And I think it's absolutely critical that they be called out for what they are. And so I went about conducting legal research on the CCP, their criminal activity here in the United States, and what laws we could use to provide sanctions, provide prosecutions.
Examples of criminal activity include stealing American sensitive information through multiple IP hacks. And it goes even further than privacy breaches. The CCP has killed hundreds of thousands of its own citizens through an ongoing brutal persecution of Christians, Uyghurs, practitioners of Falun Gong, and others. The regime also has American deaths to answer for. Chinese sources have been shipping tons of opioids into the U.S., which have killed thousands.
We know that fentanyl originates in China. It's being transferred from China through the Postal Service into the United States.
And most recently, the CCP's cover-up of the virus's human-to-human transmission caused the deaths of 140,000 Americans and counting.
If America takes the lead on this, you will see other countries also follow, because other countries have lost tens and hundreds of thousands of their citizens as a result of what we call the CCP virus.
If the U.S. does label the CCP as a transnational criminal organization, the U.S. could apply more criminal sanctions, freeze financial assets, and set up teams of investigators to track and put an end to the CCP's criminal conduct. Yor says she urges American citizens to use the power of their voices and sign the open letter to stop the CCP's inhumane practices. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And coming up, America's largest protective clothing producer is taking action to fight fraud related to its products. And in the UK, Huawei is getting ushered out as rival European 5G makers are stepping up. Find out about that and more after the break.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country has just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try the Epoch Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values, and it reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global outbreak, and so much more, then you need to check out the Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just a single $1, and we'll send you a very special free gift. A giant timeline that's 3 feet by 4 feet, documenting the FBI's abuse of FISA spy warrants. So go to readepoch.com and claim yours today.
Protective equipment maker 3M is taking action against people trying to profit off the pandemic. It filed over a dozen lawsuits to fight fraud, counterfeiting, and price gouging related to products like its N95 mask.
3M says it's filed 18 lawsuits in connection with claims of fraud, counterfeiting, and price gouging related to its products. The company is America's leading manufacturer of key protective equipment in the fight against COVID-19. It says its legal team has investigated over 4,000 reports globally. And as a result of the investigations, more than 7,000 e-commerce listings with fraudulent or counterfeit product offerings have been removed. Also, it says over 10,000 false or deceptive social media posts related to its products have been taken down. A top corporate leader said, quote, "The schemes we shut down were not only unlawful, they also endangered lives and wasted precious time and resources by diverting buyers from legitimate sources of much-needed respirators." The lawsuits are part of a series of ongoing actions to fight fraud related to the outbreak and to stop what the company calls pandemic profiteers. 3M says courts have issued 6 temporary restraining orders and 4 preliminary injunctions so far, all to stop N95 sales that it says are unlawful. The company says in some cases its actions have led to criminal charges.
American Airlines and JetBlue are joining forces to help deal with the dip in air travel demand. Under their new partnership, the airlines can now sell seats on each other's flights and share frequent flyer benefits. American Airlines is much larger than JetBlue, but JetBlue does have its own benefits. For instance, the airline has a strong market position in New York. It also has key routes between New York City, Boston, and Florida. And Huawei's rivals in the UK say they're ready to step in without disrupting customer services. This comes after the UK announced it's banning Huawei from 5G networks. All its networking equipment will be phased out by 2027.
Telecom providers Ericsson and Nokia say they are ready to step in after the UK announced it was phasing out the use of Huawei in 5G networks. The UK's digital minister said Tuesday that telecom providers are banned from buying Huawei equipment starting the end of this year. The U.S. government has claimed that Huawei is a security risk and urged allies to shun its equipment. Both Nokia and Ericsson have said that they can replace all Huawei equipment in the UK's networks. They also say this can be done without any disruption to customer services. In the UK, Huawei currently accounts for around 2/3 of BT's mobile network, 1/3 of Vodafone, and network provider 3UK is only using Huawei. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson initially resisted concerns. He allowed Huawei to roll out a new high-speed network in Britain in January. But things changed in May when the U.S. blocked Huawei's access to U.S. chips. The UK's move is likely to build pressure on other countries to split from Huawei, most notably in Germany. Huawei makes up to 90% of German provider Deutsche Telekom's network equipment. German officials worry that banning Huawei 5G could invite retaliation against German exports by Beijing. Germany is China's second largest exporter after the U.S.
Still to come, the UK is standing by its offer of giving visa rights to as many as 3 million Hong Kong citizens. We asked people in the UK their thoughts about it. And the EU is having a summit this weekend, but it might take its leaders 3 days to solve just one problem. What is this big issue? Find out after the break. Beijing passing the controversial national security law in Hong Kong prompted Britain to offer up to 3 million Hong Kongers the right to live and work in the UK. Beijing says this amounts to gross interference. NTD reporter Jane Werrell asked people in the UK their thoughts about it.
The controversial national security law in Hong Kong cracks down on protesters and gives sweeping powers to the Chinese Communist Party. The US, the UK and other countries have condemned it.
It violates Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and is in direct conflict with Hong Kong basic law.
Boris Johnson has offered a route to citizenship to Hong Kongers. Up to 3 million Hong Kong citizens are eligible to live and work in the UK and after 5 years apply for citizenship. Foreign Office sources told The Telegraph that a fraction of them, an estimated 200,000 people, are likely to take up the offer. Nathan Law, a prominent activist in Hong Kong, fled to London this week. The Chinese regime has warned there will be consequences for the UK's offer of visa rights to Hong Kongers, but has not detailed what those consequences would be.
The UK must bear the consequences that will arise from this.
But what do people in the UK think? A YouGov survey shows that 64% of Brits support giving British passport holders in Hong Kong a permanent right to live in the UK, with a similar view across Conservative and Labour voters. A lot of people we asked were unaware of the new law being passed in Hong Kong, but more had heard of the offer of visa rights.
For the Hong Kong citizens, it's really good, and I agree with the measure. Sure. I don't know how this will play with the government's stance on immigration, because up until now they want to reduce it as much as possible, and this has the potential to increase it heavily, right?
Over the next 2 years, you'll probably find that many people in Hong Kong, maybe half of them, who knows, will emigrate to places like Britain or the United States. Yeah, I think the Chinese authorities are going to clamp down on any freedom of speech.
I think people would hesitate to go to Hong Kong because of this law, for sure. I myself as well.
I don't feel sorry for them. If it happened in London or our country, I would hope everyone would fight it, because it just cannot be forced to do what you don't want to do.
Yeah, they've experienced a level of free speech for so long, so to suddenly have that curtailed, I think is going to be a real issue for them.
Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
The EU is having a summit, and the biggest challenge is to reach an agreement over its recovery plan. But with member states' opinions splitting so widely, it won't be easy. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news on Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and European news. European Union leaders are face-to-face for the first time since the pandemic began. The weekend summit is focusing on the Union's recovery plan. The huge challenge is how to bridge big divisions among members.
In Brussels, the 27 EU heads greeting each other with elbow bumps and bows. It's the first summit about economic reconstruction and the medium-term financial outlook.
If we do it right, we can overcome this crisis stronger and emerge stronger from the crisis. All the necessary pieces are on the table and a solution is possible.
The last meeting in February was not successful.
It's a moment of truth and ambition for Europe. We are going through an unprecedented crisis on the health front as well as on the social and economic front. It requires a lot more solidarity and ambition.
Their display of bonhomie came after weeks of quarrelling over the scale and scope of a joint roughly $860 billion rescue fund. But EU leaders still face a daunting task in overcoming major divisions.
Everyone really has to be willing to compromise so that we can get something out of this summit that is good for Europe.
The Netherlands is a main opponent. It wants countries receiving EU support to agree to reform in their labour markets, pensions and other sectors. Mediterranean countries want recovery financing to come as free grants rather than repayable loans to prevent their hard-hit economies from further inflating. Hungary has threatened to veto the whole package over a proposed mechanism to freeze payouts to countries that undercut democratic values.
The summit is scheduled for Friday and Saturday, but it could drag into Sunday if an agreement remains elusive. To a mid-air crisis, a 51-year-old British man was arrested over a bomb threat found during a Ryanair flight. Crew members discovered the threatening note mid-flight. The Danish Air Force then escorted the plane to its destination in Oslo. All 142 passengers on the flight from London were safely evacuated. It's the second bomb threat against Ryanair this week. A flight from Krakow, Poland to Dublin was forced to land after a similar note was found in the bathroom. To Switzerland, Swiss officials are investigating importers and dealers of defective respiratory masks, the type worn by medical workers. Authorities say 60% of masks tested offered insufficient protection and warned wearers to be vigilant. In April, the government relaxed import restrictions to stock up on supplies needed to fight the virus. Authorities suspect the masks may be from China. At least a dozen countries have had to recall equipment and virus tests from China for being defective or even contaminated with the virus itself. In the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson sets out a timetable to ease lockdown restrictions. He hopes Britain can return to normal by Christmas.
According to the new guidelines, employers will get more discretion to bring staff back to the workplace. The safety of larger gatherings will be evaluated, and social distancing rules might be dropped.
It is my strong and sincere hope that we will be able to review the outstanding restrictions and allow a more significant return to normality from November at the earliest, possibly in time for Christmas.
Johnson also set out a $3.7 billion cash boost to the state-funded health system, emphasising he is hoping for the best while planning for the worst. Local government will also have more power to lock down CCP virus hotspots, including stay-at-home orders and restricting access to certain areas.
Following on, the UK government has ordered an urgent review of England's daily COVID-19 death figures. Academics say official numbers may include people who died of other causes. The National Health Agency cross-checks deaths against a database of positive virus results. So if someone had the virus, that gets automatically listed as the cause of death. The UK has an official CCP virus death toll of more than 45,000, the highest in Europe. And British scientists have found 6 distinct types of the CCP virus, each with a distinct cluster of symptoms. They analysed data from a widely used COVID-19 symptom tracking app. The findings could help doctors predict which patients are most at risk and likely to need hospital care in future waves of the epidemic. A doctor who co-led the study said, if you can predict who these people are at day 5, you have time to give them support and early interventions. And it's farewell as British Airways has been forced to wave goodbye to its entire fleet of Boeing 747s early due to financial woes brought by the pandemic. The iconic fleet with its red, white and blue tail is the largest 747 fleet in the world at 31 planes. Willie Walsh, CEO of British Airways' parent company, has called the CCP virus the greatest crisis the airline has ever faced. The long-haul routes the 747s fly are likely to be the slowest to recover. The fleet in service for the last 50 years was meant to be grounded in 2024 in favour of more fuel-efficient aircraft. And just like his father, you may know of 11-time Grand Slam champion Bjorn Borg. Now get ready to meet his son Leo. Leo joined the famed Rafael Nadal Academy earlier this week. Leo's arrival was delayed for months by the pandemic. After his first professional match, the 17-year-old is 111th in the world junior rankings. Leo's parents hoped he would choose any other sport so he wouldn't be compared to his father. Bjorn Borg enjoyed legendary status. Then his career ended dramatically at 26 after suffering 2 consecutive losses to John McEnroe. That's all for today from NTD UK Newsroom. See you soon. Over to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And up next, cultural attractions and monuments have reopened in Paris, but the city's tour guides and travel agencies seem to be missing their usual customers. And released body cam footage reveals how Florida police captured a wayward kangaroo. That and more when we return.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly. The Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if Hong Kong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
France is the top European destination for foreign tourism, but lockdowns across the globe have heavily impacted the tourism sector. Our France correspondent David Vives has the story.
Social distancing measures continue to ease in Paris. The top floor of the Eiffel Tower reopened on July 15th, allowing visitors to enjoy the best view of the French capital. And it gives them ideas of which monuments they might visit next. The Eiffel Tower, which welcomed 23,000 visitors every day last summer, has scaled down the number of its visitors. Visitors including tourists are back, but tourists from one country are missing.
Although Europe in July opened its border to 15 countries outside the European Union, the biggest sources of tourists for Paris, the United States, remain absent from the list.
While some Parisians enjoy having more space, some are very worried not to see Americans coming back. Jean-Remy Galinon is one of them. For this vintage Citroën CV driver, bouncing along the cobbled streets of Paris and showing the city to tourists is his passion.
The Americans are number one in terms of our tourists, of course. They want to know everything. They are passionate about Paris. They are in love with Paris. They are in love with France. So yes, we're suffering the consequences. It's really, really hard.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics figures, 3,780,000 Americans visited France last year. But the coronavirus is keeping them away and Galinon out of work. Despite the reopening of cultural places and monuments, tourism professionals such as tour guides, travel agencies, and hotels see the summer season pass them by without their usual customers. For the luxury Hotel Fauchon, that had to shut on March 2nd. What will happen in the coming months might decide whether the hotel survives or not.
Will the market restart? Will planes fly again? Will foreigners return to France, or will we remain closed off like this for another 3, 4, 5, 6 months? If that's the case, then I can guarantee that this is very serious.
In 2018, the sector generated an estimated $62.3 billion in revenue, amounting to more than 7% of GDP, and directly or indirectly employed 2 million people. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
A South Florida police chase ended with a kangaroo in the back of a patrol car. Of course, it was the kangaroo they were chasing in the first place.
After receiving a call about a kangaroo running loose, Fort Lauderdale police officers managed to capture him and place him in a squad car. The marsupial was taken to a barn where the agency keeps its horses. Anthony Macias, who claims to be the kangaroo's owner, said he had been hoping to bring his pet Jack home. But police told him the animal won't be returned because Fort Lauderdale does not allow kangaroos. Macias said he was at work when he learned Jack had escaped. Macias said he got Jack about 4 months ago from a Davie man who was moving and did not want the animal anymore. Officials weren't sure where Jack would end up, but Macias said he has friends in Palm Beach County who are permitted to house kangaroos.
More than 70 NFL players have tested positive for the virus, and Serena Williams will return to the tennis court for the first time.
More than 70 NFL players have tested positive for the virus. It's not clear yet who the players are or which teams they play for. Serena Williams will return to the court for the first time since the start of the outbreak. She's going to compete at the inaugural edition of the Top Seed Open in Lexington, Kentucky. Tiger Woods resumes his hunt for a record-breaking 83rd PGA Tour win. Due to the virus, no fans are allowed at the tournament, something he described as a new reality. Real Madrid has clinched its 34th league title. The club won all 10 matches since the season returned after the pandemic timeout. Heavy police presence was seen around the city to prevent mass gatherings as authorities try to prevent a second outbreak.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Are police actually using deadly force disproportionately against black people? And how does the focus on police overshadow other monumental problems facing Black America today? Why is believing that Black Lives Matter not the same as supporting the Black Lives Matter organization? And why are Black conservatives often excluded from mainstream public awareness and discourse? In this episode, we sit down again with radio talk show personality and best-selling author Larry Elder, who hosts The Larry Elder Show for the Epoch Times. He is the executive producer of the new documentary film, Uncle Tom. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
A new round of flooding has emerged in upstream Yangtze River and is moving downstream fast. An expert says this is creating a dilemma for the Three Gorges Dam. Rumors of Chinese banks collapsing are flooding social media in China. Worried customers have descended on several banks to withdraw their money. Police took people into custody, accusing them of spreading rumors. Half of China's important agricultural provinces have been impacted by the biggest flooding in decades. Peasants and the authorities are giving different pictures about food supply for this year. Part of the plaque at the entrance to Wuhan City Hall is missing. One woman reportedly cut it off with an axe. With the virus cover-up flooding and less support from authorities, dissatisfaction in Wuhan is rising. Beijing said on Friday any travel ban against Communist Party members would mean Washington stands against the entire Chinese population. But Chinese people took to social media to say they actually welcome the ban. Tune in at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time and tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch the full China in Focus.